Jesus went up the mountain and summoned those whom he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, that they might be with him, and he might send them forth to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. He appointed the 12, Simon, whom he named Peter, James, son of Zebedee, John the brother of James, whom he named Boanerges, that is, sons of thunder, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today is the feast of St. Francis de Sales. St. Francis de Sales lived at the end of the 1500s into the 1600s, and he was the bishop of the closest diocese to Geneva, Switzerland, which basically became the stronghold of the Protestant Reformation. So St. Francis de Sales became a doctor of the church because of his efforts to convert many of the Calvinists and Protestants. He was so successful that actually there were multiple assassination attempts on his life. St. Francis de Sales is also known to many people because he wrote a book called The Introduction to the Devout Life, which is one of the greatest works to recommend from the tradition of the church. Oftentimes when people, they try to read something that is written by the saints, and sometimes, it seems almost like out of their reach somehow, right? So many of these saints, they were so on fire with God that it makes it seem like, we could never be like them. St. Francis de Sales, in his book, The Introduction to the Devout Life, he wrote it specifically for a layperson. And so it's much more accessible and attainable and just really good advice. So if there's any writing from a saint on the spiritual life that I would recommend, above all others, it would be The Introduction to the Devout Life. So if you're interested in some spiritual reading, that's a great thing to read. We also hear in the letter to the Hebrews today, we hear about this idea of the new covenant that was coming. Again, as we've been hearing all week from the letter to the Hebrews, the whole purpose of this letter is that it was written to the Christians in Jerusalem who had been Jews beforehand. This is one of the central debates that took place in early Christianity, was what do we do about all those Old Testament laws of circumcision and kosher and worshiping in the temple, etc. And one of the things the writer points out is that everything in that Old Covenant, not only has it become obsolete, but actually in the Old Testament itself it said that one day it would become obsolete. The prophet Jeremiah prophesied about a new covenant that would come. A covenant not written on tablets of stone, but written into our very hearts. In the Bible, we have the division between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which literally means the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And when it talks about the Old Covenant, it's talking about the covenant that Moses made, right? The writing on tablets of stone with the Ten Commandments and all the laws that came with it. But even in the Old Testament, there was already a prophecy that one day that covenant of Moses would be replaced by a new and better covenant. And it's something important for us to remember, because again, sometimes when people read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, they think about all the miracles that took place and everything, and they think, man, it would have been so easy to believe in God if I was there then. But in reality, the covenant that you and I are participating in by means of our baptism, by means of all the sacraments, especially the sacrament of the Eucharist, is far greater than anything that anyone in the Old Testament ever experienced. For them, the covenant with God was something that was extrinsic to their soul and their body. It was teachings that they tried to follow. But in the new covenant, in the sacrament of baptism, primarily, and then in the reception of all the other sacraments, God's power literally begins to indwell within us. That's why so many of the saints and the martyrs, they were able to perform so many miracles. and show such tremendous courage, because God was literally becoming living inside of them and giving them his strength and his power. It's something we should never forget. Something else I was just thinking about this morning is just a spiritual principle for all of us that we can take from this reading today. That the central sin of those first religious authorities who had been members of Judaism that were resistant to the Christian faith, it's because they had clung so tensely to what they were used to, the things that they were comfortable with. But God wanted to bring something even greater, and in order to do that, he had to erase everything that had come before. Moses is actually he's a great example of this. Moses, who he liberated the people from Egypt, he led them and struggled with them through all those years in the desert, and then the destination that everybody had been waiting for, entry into the Promised Land. Moses was told that it was not his job to do so. It was time for him to hand over the power and the reins to someone else. Moses showed tremendous humility and meekness and not rebelling against God for that. And the same thing happens all through salvation history and in every individual's walk with God. In order for God to bring about newer and greater things in us, we have to be open to letting go of the things that have come before. That's why priests, they don't stay in the same parish their entire priesthood. There comes a time where you have to move forward to something different, so God can bring something new. I remember a priest I know well, because he was my chaplain the semester that I was in Rome, and he was saying how every single semester he would have to say goodbye to all those students he had come to know so well. And he had to prepare himself to be just as caring to the next group. And he had to do that 21 times, welcoming new groups of students. Something important for all of us to recognize, and especially in parishes where sometimes people are in the same volunteer positions, for example, for 10, 20, even 30 years. We always need to be open to what new is coming. And that's the central message we can take from this letter to the Hebrews.